My grandmother had a saying she would often use that said that nothing is set in stone. Well, today, we are definitely setting something in stone. I stand here with my parents, Gabriel Lerner, Joy Morgenstein Lerner, and my daughter Jade. And as a family with a long history in the diamond industry, I think it would only be appropriate to first talk about the stone setter.
Willem Kennis and his dedicated team of volunteers who are all here today worked so hard in order to make the struikelsteens a reality and a memory for many Jewish families and families of members of the resistance here in Antwerp. Stone setting is not only about precision, but also about the care you bring to each piece of jewelry you make. Willem Kennis's great uncle, I learned, was part of the police corps of Deurne Noord during the war, and one of the many resistance heroes of this police force, who were known to have not only warned the Jews of Deurne of upcoming razzias, but also managed to help Jews escape when they were assembled at Cinema Plaza in Deurne. These were great acts of heroism, which in my opinion are very much like the voluntary work Willem Kennis and his team does today. I have witnessed the care and commitment with which Willem carefully prepares the ceremony and the effort he puts into placing each stone in each struikelsteen so beautifully into the pavement. I also want to say a special thank you to Ricky, who is recording the ceremony as I speak right now and is creating a video which will be a very special place of information and memory to so many of my family members, some who I know and many which I have never met. We would also like to thank Alexander Stuckenberg in Amsterdam, who is the craftsman who made this struikelsteen here today. Without Alexander Stuckenberg and Günther Denmik, the founder of the Stolpersteine Struikelsteen initiative, none of this would be possible. My family and I thank them for all the important work they do and for making today possible for us. The woman we are placing a struikelsteen for today is my mother's great-grandmother, Fajga Bajla Wychowaniec-Morgenstein, known by the family as Bubushi. Bubushi was born in Rozan, Poland in 1863. She had 11 children, the first one at age 15 and the last one at age 45. Her ninth child, Shlomi Morgenstein, was the father of my grandfather, Paul Morgenstein. Bubushi came to Antwerp in 1920 following two of her sons who had settled here and were working as diamond cutters. Over this period, a large part of our family would move from Poland to Antwerp. They lived on the Morgensplein in Borgerhout, on the Leemstraat in Deurne, and also finally at this home we stand in front of today, the Lange Leemstraat 171. When the war broke out, the family made several attempts to escape with Bubushi. In 1940 to the Pana and to Andros, France. Very few members of the family ended up returning to Antwerp from these escape attempts, but Bubushi did. For a while, Jews were still able to live and work in Antwerp, even during this period of the war. 4 members of our family were deported from this very home we stand in front of today, and we wish to remember all 4 of them. The first, Abba Pressburg, Bubushi's grandson, aged 22, was arrested during the 3rd big raid in Antwerp, which took place on 11 and 12 September 1942. Few people know that this was Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, where of course all Jewish families could be found in their homes. On 20 October 1942, Bubushi, her son-in-law, Fischl Pressburg, 60 years old, and her grandson, Yankel Pressburg, 17 years old, were taken from this home. At that time, Bubushi was 79 years old. Bubushi, Abba, Fischl, and Yankel were all transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau out of Kaserne de Saint-Mechelen and killed. Yankel Pressburg was separated from his father and grandmother upon arrival to Auschwitz and sent to forced labor. The number that was tattooed on his arm was 70605. At that time, he was the exact same age as my daughter Jade is today. My own grandfather, Paul Morgenstein, escaped from Antwerp through England and finally to Cuba, where he was part of the Jewish diamond community of Havana that was created during the war and lasted only a few years. He often spoke of the kindness he encountered when arriving in England as a young boy and of his adventures later in Havana. A year before he passed away, I interviewed him about his escape story, and this interview, along with his biography, were archived both in Caserne d'Ossin and the city of Antwerp, and they will now also appear on the video that will be prepared for the ceremony. It is thanks to this escape of my grandfather that we stand here today, me, my mother Joy, my daughter Jade, and today we choose to stand together with our great-great-grandmother too. Bubashi was known to be a strictly observant Jewish woman. And even though my family today is not strictly observant, I have chosen, in memory of my family who perished in Auschwitz, to have the Kaddish recited today. It is the first time that a Kaddish will be recited at the placing of a struikelsteen in Antwerp, and for this I would like to thank Rabbi Menachem Gurari, who has known my family for many years and is making it possible. I also thank the men he has brought with him today for coming and saying this important prayer along with us. This Kaddish will be said for Fajga, Bajla, Wychowaniec-Morgenstein, Fischl Pressburg, Abba Pressburg, Yankel Pressburg, and also Samuel Mond, one of Bubashi's sons who was transported from Drancy to Auschwitz and killed during his attempt to escape Belgium. Before this prayer will take place, I also acknowledge and thank the city of Antwerp for the opportunity to honor my family in this way and for giving us the chance to set in stone today the story and history of our family and Antwerp.
גדל והתקדש מרבה ועלמה דברה כרותה והמליך מלכותה ויצמח פורקנה ויקרב משיחה ויחייכון ויומיכון וחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יש מרבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי קודשה בריך הוא לעיליה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ותושבחה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יש עלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו והוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Thank you very much for everyone who came today. Anyone who would like to put a stone, which is a Jewish ritual that we It won't pressure you if we stand right over you?
No, no pressure, no pressure.
Thank you. I didn't have much eyes last night. That was fine. There was no eye contact practically at all. That's okay. זה אחר כך, נעשה וגם מעניין
Yeah, that was Kaddish. He's getting
so they
this.
asked me to do this.
He's getting this.
Yeah, did you know this?
Yeah. Also,
No, but it's yeah, you know, it's supposed to be because normally when someone passes away,
every day for a year. Extra slow.
You know, wow.
Yeah, you have to move back.
Yeah, I mean Mom?
Yes.
I don't remember it very fondly. I remember it that I didn't, I wasn't a bad student, but they didn't stimulate anything.
Wasn't an exciting, fun thing to go to school? No.
Not really.
No.
No. I mean, I had friends, and particularly one very, very good friend, who unfortunately did not make it. They deported him, and he.
Who was this friend?
I'm sorry?
Who was the friend? The name of your friend?
His name was Windholz.
Windholz?
Windholz. And really, I remember him, unbelievable. He was a very good friend, but...
Yeah. And you were you living in the same area as this? I mean, was
Yes.
were a lot of Jewish people living
There
in the
were a lot
area?
of Jewish people living in the area. Well, I don't know. It seemed like it to me, but you know, as a child, you don't know. I was only, when the war started, I was only 10 years old. So we're talking about the memories up to 10 years old, memories which, I don't know, which are, you know, they may not all be factual, 100%, but the feeling that I went away with, that I got away with, was a feeling that I didn't get stimulated with any any interest in real education. It just didn't. The teachers weren't that interesting. I went to partly to. Part of the day was regular school, part of the day was Hebrew school, and didn't leave that much time for anything else. The school, you know, you started at 8 o'clock in the morning till about, I don't remember, but it was late in the afternoon. So basically, I don't remember much else except for the school and so on. I'm trying to think any major things that happened at that time. Not particularly.
Okay. Okay. So, as a child, when the war started, you mentioned that you were 10 years old.
When I was 10 years old when the war started.
Do you remember understanding that there was danger? Is there a memory that stands out that you remember that?
No, well, basically, as a child, what I remember more than anything else is being excited that there's going to be a change, there's going to be something different. In a certain sense, I was glad that something was happening. It started like at 4 o'clock in the morning. The sirens started, and as a child, you don't know what's going on, but you know that there's something very exciting going on. You don't realize what it is.
But it's not that you remember your parents, or conversations of danger before. It was mainly just this was started and.
The thing that I remember was that they were very alarmed. That something major was going on, and they were talking, but I didn't know what. A decision was made to leave Antwerp.
This was when you were 10 years old.
This was when I was 10 years old, when the war started. We were in Antwerp, and my parents decided, the whole family, parents, the rest of the family, we all decided that it was that we had to leave Antwerp because the Germans would be coming, and we had to move to as close to France, to the French border, as possible. We figured that if we went close to the French border, the Germans wouldn't, we would be safe, because it wouldn't be close. Antwerp was close to Germany, and the French border was farther away. So we packed up everything, and during that day or the next day, we took cars and we moved to a place called Lapin, which was on the border with France at the sea.
How did you get there?
Well, we got there by car. They hired cars, and we went. There were about 4 or 5 cars, and the whole family went to Lapin. And we was in Lapin. I remember vaguely. We were somewhere in the house or something, but what I do remember was that we were there for about a week and a half. It seems like it to me anyway. A week and a half, 2 weeks. And the thing that we used to do is we used to see the troops, the French troops, coming through, and going towards Germany. They were going one way. And after about a week and a half, they started coming back. They were going the other way. They were going back towards France. And my parents said that this was very, very bad. It looked ominous because it showed that they were fleeing from the Germans, so that we didn't know what to do for a while. And after a while, we realized that we had to get out of there. We had to start going to France because the Germans were coming.
So at this point, there was an idea that you might still go back to Belgium?
No.
That was still...
No.
Okay.
We were going to go
To France.
Okay. As far away from Germany as possible.
Right.
By the time we decided to go, which was the weekend, like, I don't know, Friday or something, and my parents tried to get, there were no more trains. The trains were not running anymore. There were no more buses. There were no more you couldn't, there was no way, there was nothing was running anymore.
To get to France, no way to get out.
Right. So what we did is we started walking, because that's what everybody else was doing. There were thousands of people walking towards France.
So literally walking, we're talking about along the side of the road with everything they have.
That's right, with whatever you could carry.
So how was this now, as a kid, again, still you're 10 years old, this is happening, there's all these people, what does it feel? Is it still like...
Well, it felt it felt strange, naturally, and it felt very ominous in certain ways. I didn't know what was going to be,
No.
Nobody did. We walked about, I guess it was like about a few miles, 4 or 5 miles. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we walked till we got to the border.
Mm-hmm.
Between France and Germany, and there was nightfall, and we spent the night at the border.
Between France and Belgium?
Between France and Belgium.
Yeah.
Yes, between France and Belgium. And I remember that we slept, but we were woken up during the night a few times by planes, just the sound of planes, not they didn't do anything. But we were just, and there were thousands of people, and the border was open. There was nobody there. There was there used to be, at that time, there were always guards at the border. The border was always closed. There weren't open borders like today. And but it was, all the guards were gone from the border. It was open. So we stayed there overnight, and in the morning we started walking again. And we started walking. The idea basically was to keep walking and get as far away from the Germans as possible. That was the basic idea. And we walked with thousands of people on the road, and at one point we met somebody that my parents knew, and they had a car, and they gave us a lift. I mean, it's a, I have a very, very vague recollection of this. They gave us a lift, and they took us a while, and for some odd reason we ended up in a ditch. Nobody was hurt, but the car ended up in a ditch, and we had to get out and keep walking.
And at this point, you were no longer with all the people. You
No,
had kind
we-
of separated, or
We were separated. But there were other people.
yeah, there were people
There
everywhere.
were people
Yeah.
everywhere. So we started walking, and every once in a while, the Germans, the German planes would come overhead,
Hmm.
and they would. We were afraid. At one point, they started bombing the refugees, and every time the German planes came, we had to get over to the side and lay down as low as we could in the trenches, and we kept walking. We're talking about walking. This was the second day, and we came to Dunkirk. And we spent the night in Dunkirk. As I remember, it was like a huge, open. Must have been, I don't know what it was, but it was somewhere. There were hundreds of people, and we slept on the floor that night, and everybody was very excited. They wanted to know what to do next, or where to go, or what to do. It was complete scared,
Panic.
and confusion, and it was very, very. As a child, I remember it was very, very upsetting. And as I said, we spent the night there, and then in the morning we started walking again. Because that was the thing to do. That's what everybody did. And on the way, as we left Dunkirk, on the road, some army trucks came along, English army trucks, and my mother my brother, who was only a couple of months old, and she was walking, and she had trouble walking, and when the trucks came along, they gave her a lift. They said they would take her to the next town, and the next town was Calais, and my father and me and there was a maid. We kept walking. Again, as I said, we kept walking.
Your sister was with you at this stage?
No,
She had gotten
my
the lift
sister
with
was
your
my
mother.
mother.
Right.
She was 5 years old.
5, yeah.
We finally came to Calais. It was like maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and people told us that there were boats that you could go to England. There were, if you went to the port, there were boats that were taking women and children to England. So I was there with my father and the rest of the family, aunts and uncles, and the whole group. We went to the port to see what was going on, and there were these boats that were taking women as children. So finally it was decided that a couple of aunts with cousins would get on the boats, and they put me on the boat because I was, my mother wasn't there, only my dad. So he he gave me to one of the aunts, and we put me on the boat to go to England. So, and he went to see where my mother was because she had been,
She had received the lift. They had to find where
they had to find where where they would end up meeting.
So which aunt did you get on the boat
I
with?
got on with 3 aunts.
3 aunts.
There were 3 aunts and there were 3 cousins and me. And these were small boats. These were the boats that they sent for refugees.
Okay, so Grandpa,
Yeah.
at this point of the story, you are talking about refugee boats, type of
Right.
refugee boats that you have gotten on with your
Right.
aunts and cousins.
Those were refugee boats that the English sent over. This was part of, actually, later on, this was 2 weeks before, this is about 2 weeks before the major evacuation of the English troops from Dunkirk. This was the early stages. So they were sending over some small boats, but very few. Later on, at Dunkirk, they sent out hundreds of these boats to pick up English
So these were
boats.
being sent by England.
By England.
And
They
the
were-
English were also present in Calais and in Dunkirk. Was it you felt
the
it
English were there. The troops, there were troops all over.
all over?
There were English troops, the French troops. It was a very active
Area.
area.
Yeah.
We didn't realize it was quite close to the war zone where actual fighting was going on, because the Germans had come around. They had encircled us, so that basically we were like in what they called at the time a pincer movement, which means that the Germans cut off everything so that everything was surrounded. Anyway, I was on the boat going to England, and I don't remember how long it took, couldn't have taken very long, and we ended up in Dover, in England, and there were buses waiting there for us, that I remember. I seem to remember it was quite late in the evening, and the buses took us to a hall where there were tables set up with food, and after we had something to eat, and then they had a committee where they made a speech and they welcomed us, and from there I don't remember exactly. They took us by bus somewhere for the night to sleep
But
the night.
So the question, once you got to England as a child, coming into England and seeing this food, and did you all of a sudden, was there a feeling of we're okay now? Like there was some kind of sense that the danger wasn't so. Was there a difference for you as a feeling?
I don't remember that much. I remember that everything was like a surreal
Experience.
it was a surreal experience. Nothing, it was total confusion practically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here I was
Away from your parents at this
with a
point.
lot of people, it was a completely
Confused experience.
Yeah, a completely confused. And as a matter of fact, I don't seem to remember very much till we got. The English gave us a house, and we ended up in the house. That's the next thing that I remember.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember anything in
How
between.
you got there, or
How
what?
I
No.
got there, how I just don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
All I know is we ended up in a house in a place called Surbiton, which was close to close to
Dover.
London, not too
To
far.
London.
And it was on the way, it was south of London. It was on the way, basically, on the way where the planes, when they came in to bomb, this was the run over which the way that they came to London. So that basically, when they started bombing, which was shortly thereafter, we were on the way. We were part of the target that they were going for London, but as they passed where we lived, they dropped some bombs.
So literally in the line of fire.
We were really in the line of fire. We were, maybe that's why the houses were, abandoned by the English, because they moved out because they knew that this was going to happen, and the houses were available, so they gave it to the refugees.
Right.
The English were very, very helpful. They were wonderful. They gave money every week and so on so that we could support ourselves, and they gave us the house, as I said, which was a beautiful house. So everything was very, very nice. As a child, I don't remember. Once I do remember that for a while there, it was very, very pleasant. Before the German planes started coming, it was very pleasant.
Any idea of how long you were actually there in this house?
Yeah, sure. We were there. We were there for 2 years.
2 years.
We were there for 2 years. I went to school there. I went to English school, and I learned English.
The kids. So you were going to school with local English children.
With local English children.
What were they like? What were they like towards you? I mean, were people friendly? The kids were friendly, or was it,
I don't really remember because it was the things that I remember, the things that make the impressions on me was the I'm trying to remember
Generosity.
it wasn't, and so the kids were, they weren't that friendly because we didn't know the language that well in the beginning. It was difficult, a little difficult, but I was with cousin Morris, and
But you were saying the thing that made the impression on you the most, were you going to say, was the general generosity of the English, or the
thing that made the most impression on me was when the Germans started bombing,
Right.
and that took over our whole life. We in the morning, during the day sometimes we would have to go get to shelters, and at night there was fear, and it was a terrible time. It was a really terrible time, and everything that I remember was involved with that experience
Of the bombing.
of the bombing, and of being afraid, and of I went to school, but when we came home from school, we had to be careful, because when the Germans started coming over, we had to run into wherever, to be out of the way of danger, and it was very. I remember we built a shelter in the house. You know, they had these things that you could build yourself. Anyway, but as I said, everything had to do with the German bombing. It was a very frightening thing, and we had family in London. So an uncle in London, and he had a house in London. And every once in a while they would invite us to come and stay there. So it was very exciting, so we went there. So we went to London, and one of these trips to London, there were air raids. You know, it was a terrible time. So one of these nights there was an air raid, and we went out to the shelter, and it was a particularly bad air raid. And when we came up, a bomb had landed on an incendiary bomb, one of these bombs that makes fires, had landed on the house, but it didn't
Go off.
explode, didn't go off. So we were lucky, but this is what it was all about. It was a time of terror. The Germans were just making a lot of terror. Anyway, we were there for 2 years, and at a certain point, my uncle this uncle in London got a message from my father that they had ended up in Cuba, that they came to Cuba. That story is a different story, but anyway, they ended up in Cuba, and they wanted us to join them because since they were in Cuba, there was a possibility for us to get there. So my aunt made, she found out, my uncle, they found out that there was a way that they could come to Canada by getting on a freighter. They had these freighters going, convoys of freighters going. There was no communication with the rest of the world except by freighters or so. There were no planes. There were no ships. There was no not commercial. Regular
Transport.
regular transport for people to get. You couldn't get out of England. There was no way to get out of England normally.
Right.
So we had to pay our way to get onto and be smuggled onto one of these cargo ships that was going to Canada. That was the only way to get out of England. So my uncle and my aunt made arrangements, and we got on a Greek merchant ship. It was called the Dimitrios Kantris. I remember the name of the ship. It was
Okay. So we're now in March 1942, and you're about to get on to the Greek freight train. A freight boat.
Now, what I forgot to mention was that the war started in Belgium in March 10th, 1940. I remember it so distinctly. It was
May
Friday.
10th. Was it May 10th? May 10th, yeah.
May 10th, 1940. And now we're in March 1942. In England, going back a little bit, my uncle made a bar mitzvah for me at the shul in England with a small, dinner.
Was this in a shul in London or in London?
In London. We went to London, and he organized a bar mitzvah for me, which was very nice.
Do you remember by any chance which area in London?
Yes, Finsbury Park
Finsbury
is where they lived.
Yeah.
Finsbury Park, and the English family was there. There were some sons and daughters, cousins of mine, and it was very nice. So by this time I was 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I just had my bar mitzvah. My bar mitzvah was in November, and we left in March,
Mm-hmm.
in March 1942. We got on the boat at night. It was in Liverpool. The boat was docked in Liverpool, and we were smuggled on. This was not legal. We were not allowed to do that. But as I said before, this was the only way that we could get anywhere. This ship was in a convoy of 27 ships that was going of all different nationalities. That's the way they organized it. They organized these ships from all the countries, and they went from England to Canada. And as I said, we got on during the night, and by the next morning we were out to sea already. And
so on the actual boat, I mean, it's a freight
It's a
boat. So do
freight
you
boat.
actually have a room of
yes,
yeah,
well, it was a freighter boat, and they had rooms,
Cabins,
like
yeah.
for
for the
crew,
staff,
for
yeah,
the staff. And
Mhm.
so we had one of those rooms,
right.
which was fine, I was very excited, as it was a different experience. I was going to Cuba to see to be with my parents, so it was very exciting. And we started the traveling, and the convoy was basically the 27 ships, and they had 3 English warships that came along with us to guard the convoy, because the Germans, this was one of the worst months of the war there. The Germans were all over, and they were sinking ships. It was extremely dangerous just to be on the ocean. And as we traveled, what happened was that when a storm came up, the ships got spread out. They couldn't stay together, and after about the 4th, 5th day, all the ships were separated because they just couldn't stay together. So this was a very, very, it was a very dangerous thing. Now, my life on the ship was very exciting, because there were all these sailors, and they will help me. They wanted me to be, to see how the ship worked, and also the captain gave me a chance to steer the ship. They had these big wheels on the ship, and he let me steer the ship. So it was extremely exciting.
And all these sailors were talking all Greek, right? Greek? Were they all Greek
No,
or
they
no?
were all Greek, but most of them spoke English.
Most of them spoke English.
So that it was, And there were particularly one particular group of three. They weren't sailors. They were actually they were officers, and their ship had been sunk. This was the third ship they were on. Twice before they had been on ships, and their ships were torpedoed. So all these stories, and it was terrible, but it was interesting. How they escaped, how they survived, how they were in the water for a long time. As a child, I remember, made a very deep impression, actually. On the one hand, I was very scared. On the other hand, I was very excited. Anyway, the trip from England to Canada, which normally these days in a ship would take about 3-4 days. It took us 4 weeks to get from England to
Canada.
And the reason for that was that we started going way up north, where there was these what do they call them? The icebergs. So that the submarines was less likely to be there, because they also had to worry about the ice. So that we tried to go as far north as possible, and you had to go very slow because it was very dangerous. So that's why it took so long. We went way up north, and it was a long trip that I remember, but as a child I remember it as being quite exciting. And we ended up in Nova Scotia, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, 4 weeks later, 4 weeks after leaving. On the boat, it was, as I said, quite exciting. We were treated very well. I mean, we were one of the crew, one of the passengers. There were no passengers. The food was okay. I mean, and it was all right. It was a way of getting from one place to the other, and it worked out very well.
Did you ever, so you said you left, it was a 27 boat convoy. Did you ever hear about how...
We heard afterwards, we heard when we came to Canada, we found out that most of the ships, practically all of the ships, none of them made it.
None of them.
Out of 27 ships, 3 made it.
3 made it.
And I was one of the 3 ships that made it.
Wow.
This was a very bad time of the war, and it was the most dangerous month in the whole war. But we made it. We came to Halifax. We took a train down from Halifax to Montreal. Now, in Montreal, a Jewish family. The Jewish family gave us a place to stay. They invited us to their home, and we had to get to Cuba. Now, to get to Cuba was practically impossible. There was no regular way of getting there. You either had to go through the United States, which at that time was, the United States didn't allow any people to come in. It was wartime. Or you had to go take a boat from Montreal to Cuba.
So the USA wasn't letting anyone, even
No,
in
people-
transit, people were not allowed to.
They weren't. I mean,
They weren't. Yeah.
they weren't. Actually, they did make exceptions. You had to apply,
Hmm.
and in certain cases they made exceptions.
But
But
overall, yeah.
basically, the policy of the United States was that the borders were closed.
Right.
It was wartime, and nobody really was allowed to go anywhere. Back forth. It was wartime, so we were in Canada for about in Montreal for about a week and a half, and it was a question of whether to. My aunt made an application to go through the United States. However, we didn't know. First of all, there was a question whether they would allow it at all,
Hmm.
and second of all, there was a question of how long it would take, even if they did allow us to come through, how long we would have to wait. Meanwhile, a ship was leaving from Montreal and going to Cuba. So, I was a child. To me, the excitement, I wanted to get going. So I wanted to get on that boat and go to Cuba. But, and it was a discussion. I remember the discussion with my aunt, with these people, and there was quite a back and forth what to do. Anyway, finally the decision was made that we were not going to go on the boat against my as a child. Anyway, not to go on the boat, but to wait for the let's say through the United States.
Hmm.
That boat left, and they had not even gotten to the sea when they were torpedoed by a German submarine, and everybody that came up that stayed afloat was machine gunned to death. Everybody, nobody survived.
This was a passenger boat.
This was a passenger boat
from Canada
going
to
from Canada to Cuba.
Oh my God!
Nobody survived, and the reason for that was that at this month, the German U-boats were at the coast of the United States and of Canada. Till then, they had never been that close, but then they were right at the countries. So anyway, we waited in Canada, and shortly thereafter, a week or 10 days later, we heard from the Americans that they had approved our passing by. We were allowed to go through the United States, starting from Canada and going all the way through to Miami, and then flying from there to Cuba. So we took a train and to New York.
From Montreal to New York.
From Montreal to New York, and we stayed in New York one day and one night. So we stayed, there was a hotel, the Wellington Hotel at 52nd Street and 7th Avenue. I remember it, I remember the name even today. We stayed there, and we went, and we saw, in this short time, we saw the Empire State Building, we saw the Normandy had been sunk. She was at the pier, so we saw that. I remember we saw quite a few things.
What it is, and you went sightseeing a little bit
Sightseeing.
during
But
that time.
sightseeing.
Yeah?
Sightseeing.
Didn't you
On
see the
the-
Statue of Liberty also?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
The Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, Statue of Liberty, I don't remember, no.
Oh.
I don't remember that. I remember the Empire
And-
State Building, I remember the... Anyway, it was very, very exciting. I mean, being in New York, I remember it being in New York at that point. Anyway, it was just for one day, but it was very, very exciting. Then we got on the train again, and we left from there to Miami.
Okay. Okay, Grandpa. So you've just gotten on the train to Miami.
Well,
From the way from Montreal to Cuba.
Cuba.
Stopped in New York.
Right. So we got on the train from New York to Miami, which took, I don't remember exactly, but in those days it took practically 12 hours, I think, or more. Anyway, in Miami we took a plane over to Cuba, and the family was waiting, my parents were waiting at the airport in Cuba, and it was very, very exciting time, you know, to be reunited after such a terrible time for them and for me. But anyway, here we were in a peaceful country. Cuba was not at war, so that we were safe. And you know, it was a little bit difficult after all this time to reconnect, to become part of the family again.
I mean,
There was Miriam,
yeah.
there was Henry. I mean, and my pals. It was a little bit. It was a little strange in the beginning, you know, up to 2 years, but it worked itself out. And in Cuba, I was very, very much involved. I had a lot of friends, and I was very, very deeply involved with the Jewish groups, with the Zionist groups. I was, you know, this was my life there.
You had friends. Are they friends that you made over there, or people that you had known from?
No, those were friends that I made over there. There was a whole Belgian contingent that had moved there.
From Antwerp,
From
or from
Antwerp. People from Antwerp that had moved there. There was a whole group, so that it was a whole community, and it was part of the community. Now, what was I going to say about Cuba? Trying to remember. Give me a moment.
Sure. Okay, Grandpa. So you were going to school in Havana
So I was going to school in Havana.
in Spanish.
Well, yes. In the beginning, I went to a place called Preparatorio Paris, which prepares you for high school in Spanish, and this was in easy Spanish, or partly Spanish, partly English. I don't remember exactly, but it was the teacher that was running it was absolutely fantastic, and I did beautifully there. I did very, very well there, and I enjoyed it very much. It was just for 1 year, but I got the whole feeling of the Spanish schooling and the language, and you know, it really gave me the basis to go into the high school there. So at this point, I'd gone to English school in England in English. Now it was English for Spanish school, and now we were going to a full Spanish school, high school. And I went in for the Spanish high school, And after a couple of months, I think it was about 6 months, I realized that I just couldn't keep up with it. It was between the way they were teaching and between the Spanish and everything else. It was too much for me.
How old were you at this time?
At this time, I must have been like 14.
Mm-hmm.
14. So I ended up in the English school there.
Mm-hmm.
They had an English school, and I ended up going there. A lot of the group of the people that from the Jewish organizations were also going there. So I had a lot of friends in the class. Slum was there.
Birnbaum.
Slum Birnbaum was there. He was sitting in the seat in front of me, and Lily was there. So it was a very, very pleasant time. It was very, very nice. I don't know how much I learned, but it was a lovely experience in Cuba. We went to concerts together, the group, we were sitting way up in the top, well, we had a view. It was heaven overlooking the stage, but we had a wonderful, wonderful time. It was very, very nice. Then in 1945, we came there in 1942. In 1945, the war was over.
Well, so hold on. So you were in Havana for 3 years.
We were in Havana for 5 years.
For 5 years.
For 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
We were there till 1947.
Let me ask you a couple of questions
Yes.
about it. First of all, what do you remember about the Cubans, like the local people? Were they...
The local people were very nice, but we didn't interact with them very much.
So it was, you
the
had your own community.
This was the Belgian community there, which was quite a large Belgian community, and this is where we lived.
Right.
We lived just outside. We lived in a part of Havana which called Vedado, which is a nice, beautiful area, just a little outside Havana. Well, it was Havana, and our life rotated mostly, as I said, around the people from the community.
Okay.
The Cubans were very, very nice, but the only
Contact that you
contact
had.
that we had was if we went shopping or something like that.
Right.
But not really socially.
Day to day,
No.
Now you mentioned something about being involved in Jewish groups. So you're talking about like youth movements.
Youth groups. I was in Hashomer Adati.
Adati. Okay.
And my madrich, the head of the group was what's his name? I'm trying to remember. He was from Antwerp.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
What were people doing in order to? I mean, what were your parents doing? What were people working? In terms of work.
Well, my father was in the diamond business. Everybody there from Belgium was in the diamond business. And
But how was there any diamond business there to begin with?
They built up the diamond business because the diamond business in Belgium was there.
Finished.
So they built up a diamond business in Cuba. They had goods shipped to them from the United States. They had whatever, I don't know, raw goods.
They were polishing over there.
They were everything.
Trading there.
Yeah, there were factories and this was all needed for the United States, for the free world. That was not, there was the rest of the world.
Nothing was happening. No.
Right. So that Cuba became a very vibrant diamond community.
Now, as a kid in Cuba,
Fischler was the
Fischler.
Bram Fischler. Bram Fischer was my madrich.
Your madrich, Bram
He was
Fischer.
the one that.
President of the boards. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
He was my madrich, and a lot of the people, you know, they were all
From
the
Antwerp.
Belgian group from Antwerp.
Right.
A
Now,
lot of people you don't know, but I mean, it's all that group,
Yeah.
and so it was a wonderful life there. It was lovely.
But did you know while you were there, was there a sense of this is temporary, like we're not staying here, or it wasn't necessarily?
It was temporary.
You knew that? Was it
You had
obvious?
yes. We knew that we basically wanted to get to the States, and the possibility was not there because they had closed the borders to the United States. Nobody, as I said before, nobody was going in and out of the United States during the war, and we were just waiting there to get to the United States.
When you say you were just waiting there, you're talking about your family, or you're talking about generally people were
Generally.
waiting to get into the
The ones
States?
that, the
Okay.
ones that came from
Right.
you know, the refugees. And that's why I say when the war ended in 1945, people started to apply to the United States for visas. And then you had to wait
And
till
see.
you were approved.
Right.
So,
I want to just ask you something about finding out that the war was over.
yeah.
How did you find out the war was over? Was it just like everyone, or did you see it in the paper,
The
or
papers
what do you?
and
Yeah.
I mean, it was big.
Was huge.
Was huge. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
And
the end of the Second World War. I mean, you know, was a tremendous. It was the end of the Second World War. Was it already in Europe, or also in the in the Pacific? I guess it was.
August was the Pacific.
The end of the World World War. Okay. Anyway.
So what was it really of like very victorious mood? People
Yeah,
were
sure,
celebrating. That's how.
Everybody,
Yeah.
the world was celebrating, and you know it was a very, very emotional time. It really was. But then, as I said, for the community in Cuba,
Mhm.
it was this was when things were going to change.
Right.
Because we were only there waiting to go to the United States. Now the war ended, we had a chance that the border was going to be opened, and we could get to the United States, and that's what everybody wanted.
Was doing. Yeah.
Now it was on a basis. It was on an individual basis. Some people were given visas. A lot of people were not given visas. Uncle Benno was refused a visa. He couldn't go. So you know, you were just waiting to hear, and we finally got our visa.
The whole you and your parents and
The
the
whole
family.
and the rest of the family. We all got visas, and we moved to the United States. I believe it was March 19. Let me see. Hold on 1 second. Let me see. It was March 1947.
So actually, it took about 2 years for you to find out that the visa was accepted. I mean, it was a very long procedure.
Yeah, it was
Right.
a lot. Yeah, it was the end of the war. People were applying from all over
All
the
over.
world,
Mhm.
and you had to wait,
Wait,
and
mhm.
see and if you got the visa, you were lucky.
Mhm.
Not everybody did.
Mhm.
Anyway, we did, and we moved to the United States. Part of the family moved there first. Uncle Giel with his family moved they got a visa earlier, and they moved here. And we moved at a little later date. And when we came here, they were here already. They
When you
had an
say
apartment
here, where?
in New York,
Mhm.
and they had an apartment somewhere in New York. I'm trying to remember.
East Bronx?
No.
What are you talking about?
Uncle Gil.
Oh.
He had an apartment. They had an
Brooklyn.
apartment in Brooklyn, and we went to their apartment in Brooklyn, and we stayed with them for a little while till we got our own apartment. Anyway, we ended up in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn. Wait a minute, I left out a lot of things. I'm sorry, I left out a lot of things.
Okay, Grandpa, we're going back, just staying in Cuba for a little bit longer.
Right.
So you had gone to high school in Spanish, and that hadn't really worked out. You went to high school in English?
And I stayed there for about a year, but that didn't seem to be going anywhere. So my father said, maybe it's a good idea that I should go into the diamond business and start working in the diamond business. He had a friend that had a factory where they were sewing diamonds, sewing, and he would apprentice me to his friend, and I would learn the diamond business.
In Havana?
I was 15 years old, and I decided, look, my studying wasn't going anywhere, because between changing schools 3-4 times and languages 3-4 times, it wasn't working. It just couldn't keep up with anything. So I decided, look, I'll go to the diamond business, and that would be good. So I started working at a factory. The problem was that the guy at the factory, he had a factory to run. It's true that I was apprenticed to him, but he didn't really have the time to teach me, because he was running the factory. It was his factory. So basically it was so frustrating. I would come home most days, I was crying. It was terrible. It was a terrible experience.
Why were you crying? Because you would just sit there. You hadn't learned anything.
The diamonds would fly. I would be on the floor looking for them half the day. I mean, his name was Schwergold. I don't know if he was in Belgium after the war. I'm not sure. Anyway, Schwergold was his name. And look, he just wasn't... there was a guy there working, he helped me a little, but basically it was a very, very bad experience for me. I didn't really learn too much. I finally learned how to sew, but it wasn't very, very good. Anyway, that lasted till we left for the United States. That lasted about a year, and that was the time of I remember it because it was the time of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I remember it was exciting times from that point of view. It was very, very exciting times. Anyway, and then we came to the United States.
What do you mean exciting times when
Exciting
you remember?
When you remember the time that you lived through with all the big. We realized at that time that Hiroshima was a major thing. I mean, it was a turning point in world history, and it was, and it is. Anyway. So we came to the United States, and
you stayed in Brooklyn with your uncle.
Yeah, and then we moved out on our own in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and my father said, "Look, he was cleaving. You know what cleaving is? He was cleaving." He said, "You know what? You do that at home, So he said, "Why don't I'll teach you how to cleave? You'll start working here and cleaving
In the
Because-
house.
in the
Mhm.
house." So that's what we did. I started cleaving, and I learned how to cleave. I wasn't particularly successful. I did okay. Paul Kaufman was also there cleaving. I don't know.
Paul Kaufman, your cousin.
My
Also
cousin
in
was
the
also-
house
also in
cleaving?
the house cleaving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it was okay. Wasn't great, but it was okay. And as I was in the States, and as I started listening to reading papers and so on, I realized that without an education here, without something, you couldn't get anywhere in the United States. I mean, you had to have some kind of at least a degree from high school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't have anything. I didn't have any papers. I had no. So I decided to go to night school. Now there was a night school in Manhattan at 190th Street called George Washington High School, and they gave a night course where you could take your exams and your degree for high school. You could finish your high school at night.
Mm-hmm.
You could take your courses and take your exams afterwards, and if you passed them, you could get a high school diploma.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that's what I needed. I needed a high school diploma. Listen, I'm not talking about college already, but at least a high school diploma to
But
start.
was this something that your cousins were also thinking about or doing, or this is really...
This
yeah.
was me. I mean,
Right.
nobody else that I know of did it. Anyway, so I went there. I went there for, I think it was like about a year and a half, and I took my exams, and I passed all my exams.
With over 90%.
Over 90 degrees.
Oh, over
And-
90% on all of them?
On all of them.
95.
Yeah. And I got my
Your high school diploma?
high school diploma. And once I got my high school diploma, then we moved to, we left after a year, we left Brooklyn and we moved to Manhattan.
Mm.
We moved to Riverside Drive in Manhattan. And I was still cleaving. But I decided that I wanted to go to college. I mean, look, I'd finished high school at night, but I decided that it would be a good idea if I could finish college.
Mm-hmm.
So I registered.
Mm-hmm.
So I registered the high school, City College, and I took a course for, as I remember it, for economy. And I went there in the evening, started like at 5 to 7 or 9, I don't remember exactly, and I went there for 2 years.
So let me ask you a question. So now you're in college in New York, you're
Right.
living in Manhattan, but
And I'm working during the
and you're
daytime.
working cleaving during the
Cleaving
day
during
in the
daytime.
house.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no longer in the house,
Mm-hmm.
in the office. They opened up an office at 47th Street.
Who opened an office?
My father.
Your father,
my
right.
uncle. And I was cleaving in their office.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a question. So but you're going to college in New York, so somewhere you know that you want to make your life in New York. You know this is where you're going to make your life.
Definitely.
Definitely.
Listen, this had been my dream as a child. when I came to England, I saw all this. I mean, my dream had been to come to the United States.
What do you mean? What did you see in England that made you
That warehouse with with the people giving everything away, and you know.
when you got to England?
and,
Yeah.
and, you know, when I got to England, and then when I came to the States seemed to me like a world. You could do things. It was open. I remember feeling that way. I mean,
You knew you wanted to make
I
your
knew
life
I
here.
wanted to come here,
Yeah.
and naturally, Paul was ready.
So you're now going to college
So I'm
in
now
the
going to
evenings,
college
studying
in the-
economy.
Studying economy.
Your father and your uncle are working in diamonds. They have an office
They have
in,
an office
in Manhattan. Yeah.
in Manhattan, and I have a desk there where
You're
I was
cleaving.
working, where I was cleaving, and I decided, you know, I had a friend, and we kept talking about maybe we should do something. I mean, cleaving was not what I wanted. I wasn't particularly meant for work at the thing. I wanted to go out, be in the diamond business. I didn't know exactly what, but selling, buying, I don't know, you know. So one day we decided we were going to get some merchandise, we were going to go on a train, and we were going to go out to another city to sell diamonds. We made up lists of customers.
Where would you get the merchandise from? Your father?
Well,
From your...
the merchandise I got from people, from my father, from other people.
And so you and this friend made up a
We
list
made
of
up a
people.
list. We made up a list. We had some diamonds with us, and we made up a list of people. The first place we were going to was Wilmington, Delaware. Then afterwards we were going to Baltimore. We just had decided, and Washington. There were 3 places I seem to remember. We took the train. We had the merchandise with us, and then we went to the jewelry stores, from one jewelry store to the other, to try and sell. I don't have to tell you that it wasn't easy. Anyway, we finally came to one place where the gentleman wanted to buy something from us, and I got so excited I dropped the scale. I was so excited. I'll never forget it. The first sale. Anyway, we sold some diamonds there, and this was the start. From there on, we went to. It was very hard. Very few people bought that first trip. We sold something here, something there, but it gave us the feeling, the impetus that it could be done. It was only a question of perseverance and of knowing where to go and who to go, you know, and so on. Anyway, so that's what we did. We then I opened up an office
Leon.
with Leon, with my partner. We opened up an office.
Was this the friend that you had been,
Yeah,
Leon?
yeah.
Right.
And we started traveling. Seriously, we went to Chicago, to Boston, all the, various places, and we made customers, and we started to